Over the next several weeks, I'm sure you're going to be seeing a lot of draft strategy videos when it comes to the upcoming fantasy football season, but unless it really specifies what picks that you actually have in your draft, it's not quite as helpful because a lot of these videos are just more general draft strategy. We're narrowing it down today to provide you guys the best fantasy football draft strategy in 2024 for picks 10 through 12. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through both underdog draft strategies and ESPN draft strategies so we can get a good umbrella of both of those platforms right there. But first, I am giving away an FFN hat this week to one person who goes down there, drops a like on the video, subscribes to the channel, and gives me their hottest take in 2024 fantasy football. So go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and go down there, let me know what your hottest take is for 2024. So the first thing that we need to do when we're talking about both underdog and ESPN fantasy football is we need to identify the roster makeup that makes up both of those platforms. If this is your first time playing, you need to know what you're working with here because that will heavily affect what the draft strategy and what the ADP is of these players going off the board. So when we're looking at underdog here, this is a 3 wide receiver roster makeup, which means that every single week, 3 wide receivers will be scoring for you. Now, underdog is also best ball, so you do not have to make weekly changes to your starting roster. Whoever you draft is going to be scoring points for you based on who got the most points at position in that particular week. So a 3 wide receiver roster construction is going to inevitably move up the value of wide receivers higher than in an ESPN league, which is only 2 wide receivers. Typically, your normal ESPN format is going to be 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 1 to 2 flexes, 1 kicker, and 1 defense. So the wide receivers and the running backs, they're not more valuable or less valuable than each other just based on how many that you're going to have on your roster scoring points for you. Now, typically what we've seen over the years is in traditional redraft leagues, the running backs are more valued than wide receivers are, and I think it is for a very good reason. But in underdog, when you're working with a 2 running back format with 3 wide receivers, which is what underdog is in addition to a quarterback, a tight end, and a flex, that obviously changes the value of wide receivers in a big way. So now that we've went through what the roster construction is here, let's look at some of the draft trends on both ESPN and on underdog as of this moment in time. So to illustrate just how valuable wide receivers are on underdog compared to ESPN, when we look at ESPN's draft board, the first 24 picks, there's a total of 9 wide receivers going in the top 24 of ADP on ESPN. Conversely, there's 17 wide receivers on underdog that are going in the first 24 picks. That is almost a ×2 difference in the value of wide receivers on underdog versus the value of wide receivers on ESPN. So that alone should tell you, you absolutely need to walk away with a wide receiver within your first 2 rounds at the very least. At least 1 in an underdog style draft. Now, let's look at the running backs on each platform. 10 running backs in the first 24 picks on ESPN, and 7 running backs off the board in the first 24 picks on underdog. So it's not that running backs aren't valuable in an underdog strategy, right? They're still valuable. But obviously, with the rate the wide receivers go at, most drafters have to identify, if I don't get a good wide receiver, the chance I have a top 12, top 15 wide receiver in the 3rd round, the 4th round, they significantly drop because 17 wide receivers are off the board by pick 24. Now, this makes it way more understandable once you line this up like this, why double hero running back strategy is a very good strategy you use in ESPN, since running backs are actually going just a little bit more than wide receivers on ESPN drafts. That actually adds up to why a double hero running back strategy, which is taking 2 running backs within the first 3 picks, that makes a lot more sense why it's more effective on ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, traditional redraft leagues than it does for underdog right here. The thing about underdog is it's just way different because of that 3rd wide receiver factor right there. Now, I did a video just a couple weeks ago highlighting the mistakes that I have made over the offseason when I have been drafting on underdog specifically. And so I want to show you some of the data that I gathered right here. So I put together a chart of some really effective and ineffective draft strategies to use in 2024 on Underdog specifically. Now, what I came away with here was the top 2 strategies based on playoff advance rate and semifinals advance rate and finals advance rate is going to be wide receivers round 1 through 3 and getting a running back in round 4, or wide receivers round 1 to 2, tight end in round 3, or wide receiver in round 4. Those have the 2 highest advance rates in playoffs, and they have the 2 highest advance rates in the semifinals. You can see it on the screen, 21% advance rate for the 3 wide receiver straight strategy, and a 24.5% advance rate when you mix in a tight end there. Now, it does say tight end 1 in round 2, which has typically been Travis Kelce. The good thing this year on Underdog is that you don't have to pick Travis Kelce in the second round. Travis Kelce goes to the back of the third round, and that's not before Sam Laporta goes off the board, by the way. Sam Laporta is the tight end 1 on Underdog right now. So let's take a step back, right? We went through all that data. We went through the best strategies to use Underdog versus ESPN. Now let's look at the targets that we're seeing in those pick ranges on both platforms right here. So when we're looking at ESPN, what you're going to have here if you're in a 12-team league is you're going to have picks 10 to 15 available to you. Whether you're the 10th pick, the 11th pick, or the 12th pick, this is your range right here. Picks 10 to 15 because you've got the snake-style draft where you get to pick again, first things first, in round 2. So here are all the players available to us on ESPN in those picks 10 to 15, and in order who I like the best. Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and Puka Nacua are my top 3 targets on an ESPN format from picks 10 to 12. Now, the reason is because I think that Jahmyr Gibbs and Jonathan Taylor both obviously have top 5 to top 3 upside. I think both of them do as well. And then Puka Nacua, I think, is also a good pick. Great rookie season. I expect him to build off of that rookie season. I'm okay with Garrett Wilson. Not as wild on him as I am with Puka, but I still am fine with him. I've taken the unpopular stand several times. I'll do it again. Not a big fan of Saquon Barkley this year at price. I've got into it a lot. Actually dedicated a whole video to it, so if you want to check it out, go check it out after this video right here. And then Kyren Williams, just a little bit too volatile for me in this range. If you want to get him with your 3rd pick or 4th pick in an Underdog draft, that's different. But as far as ESPN goes, he's just a little too volatile for my taste right now. Now let's look over to Underdog. Underdog, we've got some good picks here that I'm really okay with. We've got Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jonathan Taylor. Those are my top 4 guys. I'm fine with all of them. Preferring to go with the wide receiver in the first round. But if I end up with Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor in the second round, I know that goes against the draft strategies that I showed you. But it also is worth noting a single hero running back strategy in Underdog, if utilized properly with the right player, is also an effective draft strategy too. So I think that they both will hit. I think at the very least one of them hits. So I'm okay with walking away with one of those 2 guys in an Underdog draft. I'm okay with Marvin Harrison Jr., and I've also said it publicly this offseason, just not a big fan of Drake London's draft price. I just don't trust that Drake London takes the leap this year with an injured 35, 36-year-old Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles tear when we haven't seen him produce like a Garrett Wilson with low-level quarterback play, which he has had over the past 2 years. But Garrett Wilson has had that and produced 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Drake London, he has not done that. So I just have more reluctance to pick Drake London at this current price than I do with Garrett Wilson, who I know, even if it's a 70% Aaron Rodgers, is going to be better than anything Garrett Wilson has had to deal with. And we know Garrett Wilson's a target hog. So let's look at rounds 3 to 4. Obviously, when you're at picks 10 to 12, you get the last couple picks in the first round, then the first couple picks in the second round, and you've got to wait a long time until you get to pick again in the 3rd and the 4th round. So you're looking at picks 34 through 39 here. So you better go ahead, get some guys that you really like right now, because you know for a fact it's going to be a while before you can pick again. So let's look over back at ESPN's draft board right here. The guys in this range: Josh Jacobs, Nico Collins, Lamar Jackson, Rachaad White, DK Metcalf, and Alvin Kamara. Now, what I wanted to do here was factor in the human element. Actually, how draft strategies go in every single fantasy football draft is people like to reach and get a guy that they want. And this is typically around the range that starts happening. So you typically will see one player at the very least fall down a peg so you can take advantage and get them in this range as well. So I went ahead and added Drake London, who has an ADP of 33 on ESPN. Now, the guys that I like in this order are Josh Jacobs, Nico Collins, Lamar Jackson, and Rachaad White. Those are the guys that I really, really like. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. And what I will say about Lamar Jackson in particular is I do think that taking a quarterback or a tight end within your first 3 rounds, first 4 rounds at the latest, I think that's a move you should make just to maximize the upside that you can get at a onesie position. Lamar Jackson is not my favorite quarterback to take in fantasy football right now, but I do think is worth around 3 to 4 price. I think Lamar is very volatile. He'll get you great weeks, and sometimes he will disappoint you, which is why you'll draft a backup quarterback maybe later on down the road towards the end of your draft. But I do think that drafting a guy like Lamar is a very good opportunity to take in rounds 3 to 4. Now with Drake London, DK Metcalf, Alvin Kamara, again, Drake London, I'm fine with him here. I'm more okay with him here than I was in the first round or the second round of the underdog draft, because I just think Drake London is just a little overvalued this year. I think this is around the area I'm more comfortable taking him at. DK Metcalf, Alvin Kamara, really no secret, I'm not a huge DK Metcalf guy. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba takes a bigger leap this year. And with Alvin Kamara, I just have a bad feeling about the Saints this year. And if the Saints do have a bottom 5 team in the NFL, which I think is very possible, I think this thing could easily fall apart. There's history that links bad running back play to bad NFL teams. Bottom 5 teams very rarely produce top 20 NFL fantasy football running backs. It's just a history thing, and it's just really a gut level feeling that I have with Kamara personally. Now, when I look at over at underdog, let's apply that same thing. Let's say that someone who picked ahead of you went ahead and reached for a guy that was outside of ADP, leaving one of those other guys originally outside of the ADP in your range right now. And that guy was Michael Pittman Jr., and he's my favorite in this range. Pick 33, I think Michael Pittman's a great pick. I think he easily has the upside to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football, and I've got no issue whatsoever, especially if I've taken one of those running backs like Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor within the first 2 rounds. You got to go wide receiver again here. Now, let's say you didn't take a running back there. Let's say you doubled up on Puka Nacua, Gary Wilson, or maybe you're okay with taking Drake London there. The guys that you want to go ahead and target, in my opinion, Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta matches that draft strategy that we just went through. The big hit rate one, Sam Laporta would be a great pick here. Or even Travis Kelce, if you prefer him. I will advise you, I would definitely prefer Sam Laporta on my own personally. But this is the draft strategy that would be ideal for you to use in this particular range right here. So I think Sam Laporta is a great pick in this particular range, as well as Josh Allen. I do think Josh Allen is a great pick in this range. He's the first quarterback off the board in underdog at this point. So I think that Josh Allen, Sam Laporta, you get some real positional advantages here if you go ahead and take one of those guys in the first 3 rounds. But I will make it clear, if you picked running back in the first 2 rounds, I would definitely not do this draft strategy. You want to make sure you've got at least 2 wide receivers by this point. And that's where a guy like Tank Dell comes into play too. I love Michael Pittman, but I almost equally love, say, Tank Dell in this range right here. Getting a guy like Tank Dell in this range is better for me than taking someone like a Zay Flowers or a George Pickens because of Tank Dell's upside he has with the offense. Yes, Lamar Jackson will have Zay Flowers as his number 1. We have everything to go off of that says that. We also have every bit of history to go off of that Lamar Jackson's passing pie is not as great as a lot of other top NFL quarterbacks. CJ Stroud will be slinging the ball all over, and so you know that Tank Dell is going to hit some massive weeks, which is ideal in a best ball format. And speaking of Tank Dell right now, his line on underdog is at 4.5 receiving touchdowns. Go on there, smash the over on that, and to sign up, use code FFN, and they will give you $250 of free bonus cash to play around with. So go in there, deposit $10, place it on Tank Dell, hitting the higher mark on 4.5 touchdowns, and they'll give you an additional $250 to play with. They're throwing free money at you here. So go to Underdog, there's a link in the comments. Use code FFN to get your big bonus cash deal on the first time deposit. Now let's hop over to rounds 5 through 6. Let's go back to ESPN, see what we're looking at here. Now, in this range on ESPN, you're definitely wanting to do a very similar strategy to what I was just saying with Underdog, is you want to go ahead and take a positional advantage here. That's a onesie position. You'll want to go ahead and get a quarterback or a tight end by this range. Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, they're the best quarterbacks available at that range. I think they're both good at fantasy football. Dak Prescott easily could be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy this year. Dude throws the ball a ton. He's got CeeDee Lamb. I just don't love all his weapons. That's why he's a little bit lower in my rankings. Joe Burrow has the weapons. Joe Burrow, thing that concerns me is he's coming off an injury that's very unique, but I still think that they're both good picks at the value in ESPN. And I also think Evan Ingram, great value as well. Evan Ingram in this range is a very good value within picks 58 to 63. And surprisingly, he's the guy that if you applied the human element to it would fall to you if somebody was to fall. Now, looking at a guy like Tank Dell is also a great pick because like I outlined in the Underdog version just a round earlier, Tank Dell has a lot of upside in that range. So I would love to take Tank Dell in this range in an ESPN league. Now, getting a guy like Kyle Pitts, DeAndre Swift, Calvin Ridley, it just doesn't fit well for me. It doesn't. I don't really love the upside in this range. Kyle Pitts, it's his last stand. And I think he will be okay this year. But I just prefer to get a guy like Evan Ingram over Kyle Pitts. And DeAndre Swift, I just never trust him. Don't love the fit in Chicago personally either. And Calvin Ridley, I think is a good pick, but there's a lot of other guys that he's going ahead of that you'll find on ESPN that I don't really agree with. So I'd rather personally just get Calvin Ridley a little bit later like you can on Underdog. So let's look at Underdog right now. We're looking at James Cook, Rachaad White, Anthony Richardson here. And those are my top 3 picks right there. If you don't have a quarterback by now, let's say that you opted to go Sam Laporta or you opted to go Michael Pittman, Tank Dell, some combination of that. In the previous 2 rounds, getting a guy like Anthony Richardson, pretty good idea. Get your positional advantage there at quarterback. Now, James Cook and Rachaad White, if you're taking your first running backs, those are 2 guys you could easily trust. Those guys, in all likelihood, are not going to bust. I really believe James Cook will not bust. And Rachaad White, I think they both have top 10 upside right here. So I think that they're very good picks at their value as well. Now you're looking at Rashee Rice. It's a guy I'm getting more and more okay with drafting at this range because the more time that goes on and they haven't suspended him, I'm starting to wonder if he does get suspended this year. And maybe by the time you're watching, he does, or they announce he will not be suspended. So I'm okay with taking Rashee Rice. I'm getting more on board with it by the passing day, I would say. Now, Joe Mixon, Kyle Pitts, Chris Godwin, just don't like this range. Joe Mixon, I'm worried about the age. He's already dealing with some injuries. He's missing some practice. And Houston's discussed a 2 running back system. What is that? I just don't love Joe Mixon this year. Kyle Pitts, again, just don't really have a ton of trust in him. And Chris Godwin, really don't have any trust in him. I think his best days are behind him. So let me know what you think of the draft strategy in the comments below. And if you want to see a draft strategy that'll keep you from wasting picks ever again, click on this video right here.